He is the only superhero in the Marvel Universe who has successfully saved the Earth with his mouth. He's proficient in the magic of all things in the universe, and is known as the Supreme Magic. It is also a top billionaire worth over 10 billion, living in a $1 million mansion, wearing a sky-high watch, and the worst way to go out is to drive a Lamborghini. His name was Stephen Strange, and he was a well-known surgeon. He was an amazing doctor with hands that every doctor would envy, but also became arrogant. A patient was shot in the head, in pretty bad condition. He listened to music, chatted with his colleagues, and pulled out the bullet perfectly. The whole process only took one song. It is because of these hands that he achieved his status in the medical community. This is the day he's driving down the mountain in his Lamborghini, checking on the patient's case on the road. But because he was distracted, he encountered a car accident and fell directly from a cliff. He woke up from the hospital shortly after. He looked at those spiked hands in front of him and knew it meant he couldn't hold a scalpel anymore. So called honor and status are gone. And over the course of the next 6 months, he tried everything and he performed numerous surgeries, but it never healed his hands. Stephen also fell to the bottom of his life as a result, and even often lost his temper with his girlfriend. Just as he was devastated, a recovery report gave him renewed hope. The man who played basketball was diagnosed with a total comminuted fracture. He was supposed to spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, but now he's walking around the basketball courts. Stephen approached him and called out for a medical miracle, then showed him his hands, and he felt the same, and told Stephen a place named Kaecilius. With renewed hope, he spent all his savings and bought a one-way plane ticket to this strange place. By chance, he met the mage Morton. With Morton's help, Stephen finally meets the legendary Ancient One. Due to his excitement, he forgot basic etiquette and even asked anxiously without saying hello if he could cure his hands. Unexpectedly, the Ancient One told him that as long as he has a firm belief, his hands will heal automatically. But these remarks made the scientific Stephen vehemently deny. He started to lose his mind and yell. Ancient One saw this and directly backhanded his soul out of the body. Stephen, who returned to his body, still couldn't believe it. He thought there must be something wrong with the tea he just drank. So the Ancient One taught him another lesson. Stephen soared into the air, broke through gravity, and went into space. Then they entered another dimensional world. After traveling through multiple dimensional universes, Stephen's worldview completely collapsed. He knelt down and begged the Ancient One to teach him spells, but was rejected by the Ancient One. In fact, in the eyes of the Ancient Ones, Stephen is very talented, but he just doesn't want to hand over another traitor, because just a few days ago, Ancient One's favorite disciple, Cassie, killed a library guard and stole 2 pages of the Book of Time. That's the spell that summons the demon Dormammu. Although the Ancient One stopped them in the first place and mercilessly decided to clear the door, but the cunning Cassie still uses space magic to escape. Mage Morton believes the situation is urgent and the time for help is now. Ancient One hesitated for a moment and finally opened the door for Stephen, and Stephen began to learn spells, but he almost died in the first place. This is the first time Doctor Strange has learned spells. Other disciples can draw the gate of time and space, big and small. Stephen can't draw anything. At this time, the Ancient One came to check the progress. Stephen blamed it all on his wounded hand. However, the next second, he was embarrassed. A senior brother walked forward, revealing his left hand without a palm, and easily released the magic circle to unleash Stephen's potential. Ancient Ones took him to the top of Mount Everest. Then he turned and left. In these extreme cold temperatures, it's often the best time to unlock your potential. But Ancient One looked at Stephen, who hadn't come yet, and was a little worried. At this time, a golden portal slowly opened, and he did. After this experience, he seemed to regain his former confidence. With his superior memory and learning ability, his spells have advanced by leaps and bounds. Not only can he use the teleportation array to read all the books in the library, he can sleep and study without his body. As time went by, ordinary magic could no longer satisfy him. One night, he took down the Forbidden's Book of Magic without the warden. Following the instructions in the Forbidden's Book, Stephen opened the Eye of Agamotto. Then wear the mark on your hand and turn it to the left when you eat the leftover apple. After mastering the method of manipulating time, he aimed the time array at the missing 2 pages. Before he could see clearly, the paradox of space appeared. Fortunately, Morton and the administrator came in time to stop and scolded Stephen severely, because he uses time spells at will, and if he's not careful, he'll be trapped in a time loop forever. And then the superintendent taught Stephen about the multiverse, and told him that in order to prevent Dormammu from invading the Dark Dimension, the first Supreme Master built 3 temples in Hong Kong, New York, and London. The biggest threat now is Dormammu, the Master of the Dark Dimension. The 2 spells Cassie stole were used to connect to the Dark Dimension. As soon as he finished speaking, Cassie took the Temple of London with his men. After an explosion, Stephen was blown to the New York Temple. The guardian of the temple was soon dealt with by Cassie. Stephen saw this and quickly cast his magic to engage in a confrontation with 2 of his subordinates. But Stephen was beaten so powerless to fight back, so he had to choose to escape. Cassie, who was behind him, folded his hands, and cast space spells. With the flow of objects around him, Stephen seemed to be standing on a treadmill and walking in place, which was played on by Cassie with superb magic. Fortunately, his mind was still clear. A free fall kicked the opponent into the desert of the portal. Then another fell over the shoulder and sent another into the rainforest. But even without two opponents, Stephen is still no match for Casey. After a fight, Stephen was kicked down the stairs, and the temple's cloak came to its rescue just in time, and Doctor Strange was born. But the cape seems to have a mind of its own. Stephen tried to take the axe, but the cape wouldn't let him go. After pulling back and forth for 2 rounds like this, Stephen had to give up the axe as the cloak meant. Quickly picked up the magic lock armor on the wall and threw it at Cassie. Cassie was instantly subdued to the ground. But the subdued Cassie is still dishonest and constantly bewitches Stephen to want him to fall into the arms of Dormammu, too. He also said that the Ancient One had secretly absorbed the power of the dark space and gained immortality. But Stephen couldn't believe what Cassie said. Just as he let down his guard, an arrow suddenly pierced him in the heart. At the critical moment, the magic cloak helped again, and Stephen quickly opened the portal and went to the hospital to find his girlfriend for help. At the moment of life and death, Stephen's soul suddenly exits his body and instructs his girlfriend to perform surgery for him. At the same time, the traitor in the temple also escaped from the body, broke free from the shackles and rushed into the hospital to fight with Stephen. During the fight, Stephen found that the electric shock was very helpful to him, so he asked his girlfriend to increase the battery, successfully blew the opponent to ashes by electric shock. After returning to the temple, Ancient One was pleased with his efforts to protect the temple, but Stephen asked her if she had absorbed the power of darkness and achieved immortality. Ancient One turned and left the temple without much explanation. Morton on the side collapsed instantly when he heard this. He didn't believe his master over the years would do this, and had a big fight with Stephen. Just then, Cassie came back with 2 of his men. In order to protect the safety of the temple, Stephen opened the mirror space to dissolve the opponent's spell, but Cassie became even stronger when he connected to the dark dimension. He waves his hands, and the temple splits in 2. Stephen and Morton fled the temple in a hurry. Unexpectedly, the space outside was also distorted. Stephen leapt up the wall and tried to draw the time gate to escape the dimensional world. When Cassie saw this, he directly slapped the whole city like waves. They were tossed around like chickens. Soon Stephen was blocked by Cassie, just as his life was hanging by a thread. Ancient One arrived just in time. She is the most powerful supreme wizard in the Marvel Universe. Not only can it absorb energy from the multiverse to summon shields and weapons, she can also blow the human soul out of the body with one palm. As long as she waved one hand, the entire space was folded and twisted by her. So can you imagine? He was dropped to his death. Just now, Stephen was grabbed by Cassie's throat. The Ancient One mage appeared in time to reintegrate the space and successfully rescued the 2. But seeing the black mark between her eyebrows, Morton couldn't accept it for a while. Apparently she has absorbed the power of the dark space, but now is not the time to explain. Her hands turned into shields, and her strength was 1 against 3, as if the entire mage world was no match for her. Even the spells that Cassie was proud of were easily bounced back by her. Cassie saw the disparity in strength and could only resort to underhanded tactics. He drew the sword with one hand and stabbed the Ancient One with his subordinates. Then he kicked her out of the mirror space, fell from a tall building, and hit the ground hard. Stephen rushed her to the hospital, but the Ancient One's soul has left her body. Stephen followed him to the balcony. Ancient One tells Stephen that she too is tired of absorbing dark energy, but in order to maintain the peace, she had to improve her spells this way. It's time to hand over the responsibility of protecting the planet to Stephen. The Ancient One disappeared. At this moment, Stephen finally woke up and became the new Supreme Mage to protect the Earth. On the other side, Cassie and others passed through the time and space gate to the last line of defense on Earth. By the time the 2 of them arrived, it was too late. The dimensional space has been opened. Dormammu is gradually swallowing the Earth. Casey rushed directly to Stephen. Then Stephen thought of the Eye of Agamotto. He seals his hands and casts time magic, and for a moment time seems to freeze. He turned the seal, and everything around him began to flow backwards, and the damaged streets quickly recovered. But Stephen doesn't seem to have fully mastered such a powerful spell. Cassie and others broke free from the shackles of time and stopped the continued operation of time magic. As the time circle shattered, the surrounding spacetime fell into a static state. At this moment, Stephen seemed to have thought of something, got up and flew directly into the dark space. After giving myself a time loop, I decided to negotiate face-to-face with Dormammu. He stood on the Dark Planet and shouted that he was here to negotiate terms. But as the boss of the Dark World, Dormammu didn't take him seriously at all. He directly sprayed Steven into ashes with energy rays. However, in the next second, time goes back to the starting point. Steven said the same thing. And as soon as Dormammu said it, something was wrong, but he didn't take it to heart. So the cycle of death and resurrection goes back and forth. And eventually Dormammu gets a little impatient. He had to compromise on Steven's terms. After Steven returned to the ground, Cassie and the others gradually retreated and flew to the Dark World. Then Steven activated the Time Seal again to restore the temple, and Morton, whose faith collapsed, decided to part ways with them. So far, it has also been laid the groundwork for the second part of Doctor Strange. When Steven returned to the temple, he put the Eye of Agamotto back in its place. Maybe it will only see the light of day when the next crisis comes.